In the bone-chilling winter of 1915, two soldiers huddle in the frozen mud of the Western Front. Private Thomas Murray's trembling hands strike his last match, sheltering the precious flame as he lights his final cigarette. The ember glows like a distant star in the pre-dawn darkness. Next to him, a fellow soldier shivers violently, his breath forming ghostly clouds in the frigid air. Without hesitation, Murray passes him the cigarette, a small act of humanity in a place where humanity has long since died. Neither man knows that in mere minutes an eerie silence will fall over the trenches. Neither suspects that the approaching fog carries a deadly new weapon that will force them to make an impossible choice between certain death and a desperate gamble across no man's land. Will this shared moment of compassion give them the strength to survive what comes next? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The brass matchbox in Murray's pocket carried more than just his last match. It held the warmth of a Yorkshire hearth and memories of a life before the war turned the world to mud and barbed wire. He'd received it from his father on his 21st birthday, just 3 months before the recruitment officers came to their mining town, with promises of adventure and tales of German atrocities in Belgium. Thomas Murray had never been one for grand gestures or flowery speeches. His hands spoke for him, calloused from years of working alongside his father in the coal mines of Yorkshire. They knew the language of earth and stone. As a mining engineer, he'd learned to read the whispers of the ground, to understand the subtle shifts that meant the difference between life and death hundreds of feet below the surface. The photograph he kept in his breast pocket was worn at the edges, softened by countless touches. It showed his family standing proud outside their modest home in Wakefield, his father in his Sunday best, mother wearing the brooch she'd inherited from her grandmother, and his younger sister Mary, beaming in her new dress. The corner was stained with coal dust that wouldn't wash away, a reminder of the life he'd left behind. He remembered the day he'd enlisted, how his father had gripped his shoulder with those powerful miner's hands and said nothing. The old man knew what war meant. He'd served in Africa during the Boer campaigns. His silence had spoken volumes, carrying both pride and a deep, gnawing worry that Murray only now fully understood. The trenches weren't so different from the mines, in their own way. Both were man-made wounds in the earth, places where men huddled, in darkness, and learned to trust their instincts. But while the mines had been places of creation, of bringing forth resources to fuel homes and industries, these trenches were monuments to destruction, their walls echoing with the sounds of humanity's capacity for mechanized death. James Cooper, the man sharing his cigarette, reminded Murray of the younger lads he'd trained in the mines. There was the same eager nervousness in his eyes, the same need to prove himself worthy of the trust placed in him. Cooper had been a clerk in London before the war, his hands more accustomed to fountain pens than rifles, but he'd adapted to trench life with a quiet determination that Murray respected. The past weeks had forged an unlikely friendship between them. They'd shared watches in the pre-dawn hours, speaking in hushed tones about their lives before, their hopes for after, if there was an after. Cooper had a girl waiting for him, a nurse serving in one of the field hospitals. He carried her letters like talismans, reading them by candlelight in the dugouts during the long nights between shellings. Murray's own letters were fewer, mostly to Mary, who worked in a munitions factory now. His last letter from her had described how her hands had turned yellow from the cordite, how all the women in the factory bore the same golden stains like badges of honor. She'd written about their mother's garden, how the roses still bloomed despite everything, and how their father still went down into the mines every day, doing his part for the war effort in his own way. The war had changed them all. Murray saw it in the faces of his fellow soldiers, in the way they aged years in months, in how they learned to sleep through artillery barrages, but wake at the softest unusual sound. He saw it in himself when he shaved, using the small mirror he kept in his kit. The lines around his eyes deeper, the set of his jaw harder. Yet here he was, sharing his last cigarette with a former London clerk in a frozen trench, the pre-dawn darkness pressing around them like a physical presence. Their breath mingled with the mist, creating ghostly shapes that danced briefly before dissipating into the cold air. Above them, stars were beginning to fade as the first hints of dawn crept into the sky. A dawn that would bring with it horrors neither man could yet imagine. The brass matchbox in his pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment, as if it too sensed the approaching storm. Murray ran his thumb over its worn surface, feeling the familiar inscription, "To Thomas, on your 21st, keep the light burning, Father." In the mines, light had meant life. Here in the trenches, even the smallest light could draw a sniper's bullet. Yet men still risked it for moments like these, moments of shared humanity in a place where humanity came to die. The military-issue pocket watch in Murray's hand ticked steadily toward dawn, its brass case dulled by months of handling. 4:15 in the morning, the darkest hour. Along the line, men stirred in their dugouts, preparing for stand two, that daily ritual, when every soldier manned the firing step, rifles ready, waiting for the light and whatever it might bring. Lieutenant Parker moved down the line, his footsteps squelching in the mud. "Look alive, lads," he whispered. Though there was little need for the reminder, everyone felt it. Something was different this morning. The usual pre-dawn bombardment from the German lines hadn't come. The silence lay thick as a wool blanket over no man's land, broken only by the occasional crack of frozen earth or distant cough. Cooper checked his rifle for the third time, mechanical movements learned through endless repetition. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, Murray noted, but from the bone-deep cold that had become their constant companion. February in Flanders showed no mercy to man nor beast. "Quiet's not natural," whispered Sergeant Mills, a former gamekeeper whose keen eyes had spotted more than one German patrol trying to probe their lines. He stood now at the parapet, peering through a periscope at the tangle of barbed wire and shell holes that separated them from the enemy. "Jerry's up to something." Murray knew he was right. In the mines, he'd learned to read silence, how a certain quality of quiet often preceded a roof collapse or gas pocket breach. This silence had that same pregnant feeling, as if the very air was holding its breath. The watch in his pocket ticked on. 4:30. Behind them, the company cook would be starting the morning tea, though few would have time to drink it before it grew cold. Such were the small rituals that kept them tethered to sanity. The daily stand to, the tea, the morning hate, when both sides exchanged desultory fire more out of habit than malice. A new sound caught Murray's attention, a faint metallic blink from the German lines. He'd grown accustomed to cataloguing every noise, knowing that the wrong sound at the wrong time could mean death. This one was different, not the usual adjustment of equipment or rattle of mess tins. "Sir," he called, softly to Lieutenant Parker, "something's moving over there." Parker came quickly, his young face already bearing the worn look of command. At 23, he was one of the few original officers still with the company, having survived where others had fallen to bullets, shells, or the creeping horror of trench warfare. He took the periscope from Mills and studied the German lines. "Can't see a bloody thing in this mist," he muttered. "But I trust your ears, Murray. Pass the word down. Extra vigilance." The message rippled along the line in whispers. Men straightened at their posts, fingers tightening on rifle stocks. In the growing light, Murray could make out more details of their position. The sandbagged walls of the trench, the wooden duckboards half submerged in mud, the torn edges of the camouflage netting that hung limply overhead. Cooper pressed closer, speaking so softly Murray had to strain to hear. "Reminds me of the fog back home, rolling in off the Thames. Used to watch it from London Bridge, the way it swallowed the city bit by bit." Murray nodded, understanding the need to talk. to connect these moments of tension to memories of normal life. "Different kind of fog here," he replied. "Never known London fog to have that queer yellowish tinge to it." As if his words had summoned it, a peculiar odor began to seep into the trench. Sharp, alien, with an underlying sweetness that made the back of his throat itch. Murray had smelled something similar once, in a mine where chemical runoff had contaminated a water pool. The memory stirred something in him, a warning that his mind couldn't quite grasp. 5 o'clock. The mist had thickened, taking on that strange yellow cast he'd noticed. More sounds came from the German lines now. Metallic sounds, the creak of leather, muffled voices. Along the British trench, men coughed and cleared their throats. Lieutenant Parker appeared again, moving faster this time. "Anyone else smell that?" he asked, his voice tight. "Like chlorine from the cleaning supplies, but stronger." Murray's mining instinct screamed danger. In the pits, unusual smells meant evacuation, no questions asked. But here they were trapped, with orders to hold the line at all costs. The watch in his pocket seemed to tick louder, marking time towards something he could feel approaching, but who couldn't yet name. A wind stirred, gentle but steady, blowing from the German lines toward their position. With it came more of that sweet, sharp smell, stronger now. Men began to cough in earnest. Someone down the line retched. Murray's eyes started to water, and beside him, Cooper pressed a sleeve against his face. "Sir," Murray called to Parker, his voice rough. "In the mines, when we smelled chemicals like this, we'd wet cloth and cover our faces. Might help." Parker didn't hesitate. "Pass it down. Wet your handkerchiefs, anything you've got. Cover your faces." The order spread quickly, accompanied by the sounds of water bottles being opened, fabric being torn. Murray's watch showed 5:15 when the first scream came from further down the line. Through the thickening yellow mist, he could see figures, staggering, clutching their throats. The sweet, sharp smell had become an overwhelming presence, burning his eyes and lungs, despite the wet cloth pressed against his face. "Gas!" The cry went up, passing along the trench like a wave of terror. "Gas attack!" But it was too late for many. The morning watch, that daily vigil against traditional dangers, had failed to protect them against this new horror. As dawn broke, over the Western Front, the war changed forever, and with it the fates of every man in that frozen trench. The fragment of German gas mask Murray had found during last night's patrol now seemed like a grim prophecy. He'd discovered it tangled in the wire, its eyepieces glinting in the moonlight like an oracle's warning. Now, as the yellow cloud rolled over their trenches, he understood its terrible significance. "Down, get down!" Lieutenant Parker's voice cut through the chaos. "The gas is heavier than air. Stay low." Murray grabbed Cooper's sleeve, yanking him below the parapet. Around them, men dropped to their knees in the mud, pressing wet cloths to their faces. Some weren't quick enough. Their screams turned to wet, choking sounds that would haunt Murray's dreams for years to come. Through the burning in his eyes, Murray saw Sergeant Mills stumble past, helping a young private whose face had turned a horrific shade of blue. The boy couldn't have been more than 19. His eyes bulged as he clawed at his throat, fighting for air that no longer gave life. "The dugouts!" Murray shouted through his sodden handkerchief. "We need to get below ground." In the mines, he'd learned that deadly gases often pooled in low areas. But here, with the gas pouring down from above, their underground shelters might offer temporary refuge. Lieutenant Parker caught his meaning. "Everyone who can move, into the dugouts. Help those who can't." The order spread along the line, punctuated by the sounds of retching and desperate. Gasping, Cooper helped Murray guide men toward the nearest dugout entrance. The gas cloud had turned the early morning into a hellish twilight, yellow-green and thick with death. Each breath felt like inhaling liquid fire, even through the wet cloth. "Wait," Murray called, remembering something vital. "Block the entrances. Once we're in, anything you can find. Sandbags, greatcoats, whatever will slow the gas." Inside the dugout, the air was marginally clearer, though the deadly vapor began seeping in almost immediately. Men pressed against the walls, some praying, others cursing, many simply trying to draw breath without screaming. "The candles," Murray said, pointing to the stub of a candle on a shelf. "Light them. If they go out, the air's gone bad." Another lesson from the mines, where flickering lamp flames had warned of dangerous gases. Cooper's hands shook as he struck a match. The tiny flame seemed to struggle against the contaminated air, but it held. They lit several candles, placing them at different heights. Murray watched their flames intently, knowing their lives might depend on understanding how the gas was moving. Above them, the sounds of battle began to merge with the chaos of the gas attack. German artillery opened up, sending shells crashing into their lines. The combination was devastating. Men caught between staying in their shelters with the seeping gas or facing the barrage above. "They're following the gas with an attack," Parker said grimly. "Standard doctrine, gas, artillery, then infantry." His voice was hoarse, and even in the dim light, Murray could see the angry red inflammation around his eyes. A runner appeared at the dugout entrance, silhouetted against the poisoned air outside. "Sir, reports coming in. Gas attack all along." The line, "Heavy casualties in sectors 3 and 4. Command post requesting status." Parker turned to Murray. "What's your assessment? You know more about gas than any of us." Murray forced himself to think past the burning in his lungs. "The gas is chlorine. I recognize it from industrial work. It reacts with water to form acid, that's why it burns. But it should disperse eventually, especially if the wind changes." "How long?" "In the mines, we'd wait at least an hour after bad air before trying to ventilate. But this," Murray shook his head, "this is different. Never seen so much." A series of explosions rocked the dugout, sending dirt cascading from the ceiling. The German artillery was finding its range. Through the entrance, Murray caught glimpses of figures moving through the gas cloud, German infantry advancing behind their wall of chemical death. "We can't stay here," Cooper said, voicing what they all knew. "Gas or shells will get us if the Germans don't." Murray's mind raced. In the mines, they'd used ventilation systems to clear bad air. But here they had nothing except the wind, he said suddenly. "If we can read the wind patterns, predict how the gas will move." He pulled out his father's old brass matchbox, now empty of matches but still useful. Holding it up to catch what light filtered through the dugout entrance, he studied the way the air currents moved the gas. Years of watching for deadly gases in mine shafts had taught him to read air movements that others might miss. "There's a pattern," he said after a moment. "The gas follows the contours of the ground, pools in the low spots. But the wind's shifting. See how the clouds breaking up in places?" Parker leaned forward, squinting through irritated eyes. "Can we use that? Find a way through?" "Maybe." Murray's mind worked through the possibilities. "If we time it right, find the gaps between gas pockets. But we'd need to move fast, and everybody would need to follow exactly the right path." Another explosion shook the dugout, closer this time. Through the entrance, they could hear German voices closer than they should be. The candle flames flickered, bending away from the entrance as a fresh wave of gas sought them out in their shelter. Murray looked at the men crowded in the dugout. Some barely conscious, others struggling to breathe through blood-flecked foam. The gas had found them despite their precautions, and soon the Germans would follow. They needed to move, but moving meant crossing through that poisoned cloud above. He felt the weight of his mining experience pressing down on him. How many times had he led men through dangerous areas in the mines, following the subtle signs that meant the difference between life and death? This was no different, except the stakes were even higher. Lieutenant Parker read his expression. "What do you need?" "Rope," Murray said, "long enough to link men together. In the mines, we'd use guide ropes in bad air, keep everyone following the same path." He paused, knowing what he was about to suggest might sound mad. "And I need volunteers, men who can still run. We'll need to scout the gaps in the gas. Find a route out. Cooper stepped forward immediately, despite his racking cough. "I'm with you." Others followed, those who could still stand, still fight. The gas had not broken their spirit, even as it burned their lungs and blinded their eyes. Murray looked at their faces, understanding that what he was about to ask might kill them all. But staying meant certain death, and he had not survived years in the mines by accepting certainty. Sometimes the only way out was through the darkness, following nothing but instinct and hope. The chlorine-stained handkerchief around Murray's face had turned from white to sickly yellow, each breath drawing poison through the increasingly ineffective cloth. He led the first scouting party up the dugout steps, Cooper close behind him, both men crouching low where the air was clearest. "Watch the flame," Murray whispered, holding up a candle stub. The tiny flame bent and wavered, pointing the way the gas flowed like a compass needle seeking north. In the mines, he'd learned to trust such simple tools more than any fancy equipment. They, seen above ground, defied description. Dawn had fully broken, but the light was wrong, filtered through the poisonous cloud to cast everything in a sickly chartreuse glow. Bodies lay crumpled along the trench walls, some still moving weakly, others terrifyingly still. The gas had done its work with horrific efficiency, like the pit collapse at Wakefield, Murray muttered, more to himself than Cooper. Same color the air turned when the coal dust mixed with the rain. He'd helped with that rescue, guided survivors. Through spaces where the air itself became a weapon. Now he needed to do it again. Lieutenant Parker emerged from the dugout, leading a line of soldiers tied together with communication wire stripped from the walls. Each man held a piece of rope connecting him to the next, an old mining technique adapted to this new hell. Their faces were wrapped in whatever cloth they could find, handkerchiefs, torn shirts, even sock wrappings. "The Germans will expect us to retreat straight back," Parker said, his voice muffled through his makeshift mask. "That's where they'll concentrate their fire." Murray nodded. "We go sideways then. Follow the trench line until we find clean air, then look for a way out." He paused, watching the gas swirl in eddies around their feet. The wind's shifting. "We might get lucky." They moved in small groups, Murray leading the first, while Parker organized the others. Cooper stayed close, helping those who stumbled. The gas burned their eyes, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few yards ahead. Murray navigated by touch and memory, one hand trailing along the trench wall. A shell screamed overhead, exploding somewhere behind them. The Germans were maintaining their barrage, trying to catch anyone fleeing the gas. The explosion sent more, gas swirling around them, but it also created updrafts that temporarily cleared pockets of air. "There!" Cooper pointed to a section of trench where the yellow cloud thinned momentarily. "Is that our chance?" Murray studied the gap, remembering similar air movements in mine shafts. "Not yet. Wait for the pattern." Another shell landed, and he watched the gas swirl. "Now, move!" They hurried forward, staying low, guiding the line of men behind them. Each step was a gamble. The gas could shift at any moment, closing their escape route. Murray felt the rope go taut as someone stumbled, heard coughing and retching behind him. "Keep moving," he called back. "Clean air ahead." It was partly true. The air was clearer here, though still thick with chlorine. They'd found a relatively safe pocket created by the meeting of two trench walls, where the gas flowed differently. Murray quickly directed men into the space, watching as Parker brought up the rear with another group. "How many?" Murray asked. 32, Parker replied, his voice rough. "All who could walk from our section, maybe more coming from other dugouts if they figured it out." Murray did a quick count of their supplies. Each man had his rifle, most had gas-soaked masks of some kind, and they'd managed to grab a few water bottles and ammunition boxes. Not enough for a long fight, but better than nothing. A new sound cut through the chaos, German voices, closer now. Through gaps in the poisoned air, they caught glimpses of grey uniforms advancing behind the gas cloud. The enemy was following, their chemical weapon, expecting to find only corpses or dying men. "They'll be wearing masks," Cooper said. "We won't stand a chance if they find us." Murray felt the weight of his mining lamp still attached to his belt, another piece of his old life that might save them now. "Sir," he turned to Parker, "there's an old mining technique. When the air goes bad in one shaft, you don't just run. You find another way out." Parker understood immediately. "The communication trenches?" "Better." Murray pulled out a dirty map from his pocket, one he'd marked with notes about the ground conditions. This whole area was mined before the war. "Coal seams run all through here. There'll be old shafts, drainage tunnels." "Underground," Cooper breathed, "where the gas can't follow." Parker studied the men around them. They were a sorry lot, coughing, eyes streaming, some barely able to stand. But they were alive, and where there was life, there was hope. "How long to find an entrance?" Murray traced the map with a mud-stained finger. "There's an old air shaft, about 200 yards east. Used to ventilate the deeper workings if it hasn't collapsed." Another explosion rocked the trench, followed by German shouts. They were running out of time. "It's our best chance," Parker decided. "But the gas, we'll need to time it perfectly," Murray said. "Wait for the next barrage. The shells will." "Clear paths in the gas, create pressure waves we can follow, like riding the air currents in a collapsing mine." Cooper checked his rifle, made sure it was clear of mud. "And if we run into Germans, then we fight," Parker said simply. "But they won't expect anyone to still be alive in this sector. That's our advantage." Murray looked at the men around him. Miners' sons, factory workers, clerks like Cooper, all transformed by the war into something harder, more desperate. The gas had changed them again, burning away any illusions about glorious combat or heroic charges. Now they were simply men trying to survive, using every scrap of knowledge and experience to stay alive. Murray touched the yellow-stained handkerchief. At his face, a badge of this new kind of warfare. They'd adapted to the trenches, the shells, the mud. They would adapt to this too, or they would die trying. "Ready the men," he told Parker. "When the next barrage starts, we move. All of us together, following the rope line. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just keep moving toward the air shaft." Above them, the yellow dawn continued to seep through their ruined world, carrying death on every breath. But underneath, in the darkness of the old mines, there might still be a path to survival. Murray had spent his life learning to read the Earth's secrets. Now those lessons would either save them all or lead them to a different kind of grave. Murray's mining lamp cast weak shadows against the time-worn walls of the shaft entrance. The old airway was barely wide enough for a man to pass through, its wooden support beams green with age and damp. But it was their only chance. "Mind your heads," he warned, ducking under a partially collapsed beam. "And test each step before you put your weight down. These boards could be rotten." They descended in single file, 32 men linked by lengths of communication wire, moving from the poison above to the uncertain darkness below. The sounds of battle grew muffled, then distant, replaced by the drip of groundwater and the creak of ancient timber. Cooper stayed close behind Murray, holding up a second lamp they'd salvaged from another miner in their company. The double light helped pierce the gloom, revealing the shaft's construction in greater detail. Murray read the signs like a familiar book, the cut of the rock, the angle of the supporting crossbeams, the direction of the water flow. 19th century work, he muttered, recognizing the construction style. Good craftsmanship. These Belgian miners knew their business. "How far down do we need to go?" Parker asked from his position near the middle of the line. "About 40 feet. There should be a main gallery that runs parallel to the front line." Murray paused, testing a suspect board with his boot. "The Germans probably don't even know it exists. These old mines weren't on their maps. I only know about them because my father worked with a Belgian mining engineer before the war." The shaft ended in a small chamber with 3 tunnels branching off into the darkness. Water trickled down one wall, forming a small pool that reflected their lamplight. The air was stale but breathable, a blessed relief after the poison gas above. "Which way?" Cooper asked, directing his lamp beam down each passage in turn. Murray pulled out his map, now smudged with mud and yellow stains from the gas. He oriented himself using the water flow and the angle of the shaft they'd descended. East tunnel. It follows the cold seam toward our lines. The other two probably lead to collapsed workings. As the men filed into the chamber, Murray studied their condition. The descent had been hard on those worst affected by the gas. Many were still coughing, their breathing ragged. Others showed signs of chemical burns where the gas had touched exposed skin. "We need to rest," Parker decided, seeing the same signs. "Just long enough to get our breath back and check for serious casualties." They settled in the chamber, some men slumping against the damp walls, others helping the worst affected. Murray used the time to make a more thorough inspection of their refuge, testing the roof stability and checking air currents. "Sir," he called Parker over, keeping his voice low, "found something interesting." He held up his lamp, illuminating tool marks on the tunnel wall. "These are newer than the rest. Someone's been working down here since the war started." Parker examined the marks. "Germans? No." Murray ran his fingers over the cuts. "British Army Royal Engineers, I'd guess. They've been exploring these old workings, maybe planning to use them." He paused, considering the implications. There might be supplies cached somewhere down here. The sappers always plan ahead. A wet cough echoed through the chamber, followed by more. The gas was still working its way through their systems, burning their lungs from the inside. They needed more than just rest. They needed medical attention and clean water to wash the chemical residue from their skin and clothes. "How long can we stay here?" Cooper asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Murray considered their situation. "The air's good for now, but too many men breathing in a confined space will change that. We need to keep moving, find a larger space, or a way to contact our lines." "If the Royal Engineers have been down here," Parker mused, "there might be a way to signal them. They usually mark their routes." Murray nodded. "Look for chalk marks on the walls or colored tags on the support beams, anything that seems deliberate." They organized search parties, sending men in pairs down each tunnel, just far enough to check for markings. Murray used the time to draw a rough map of the workings in his notebook, trying to correlate the underground layout with what he knew of the trenches above. Cooper returned first, excitement breaking through his exhaustion. "Found something. About 50 yards down the east tunnel. Looks like some kind of storage space. There are boxes with Royal Engineers markings." They followed him down the tunnel, moving carefully in the uncertain light. The passage showed signs of recent work. Fresh wooden supports, cleared debris, even primitive drainage channels cut into the floor. The storage space was a natural cavity in the rock, enlarged and reinforced by military engineers. "Look at this," Parker said, opening one of the boxes. "Emergency supplies, tinned food, medical kit, even some clean water." Murray examined the engineers' work more closely. They'd done a professional job, turning the old mine into a viable emergency shelter. But why? What had they been planning? Before? The answer came as he studied their reinforcement technique. "They knew," he said suddenly. "The engineers knew the Germans might use gas. They prepared these tunnels as emergency refuges." Parker looked up from his inventory of the supplies. "But they never told the frontline troops. Maybe they didn't finish in time. Or maybe they couldn't risk the Germans finding out." Murray ran his hand along a support beam, feeling the solid craftsmanship. "Either way, we're lucky they did the work." A distant rumble filtered down from above. The German bombardment was continuing, perhaps now targeting suspected refuge points. But down here, 40 feet below the poisoned earth, they had a chance to regroup, to plan their next move. Murray checked his father's watch, wiping condensation from its face. They'd been underground for almost an hour. Above them, the gas might be starting to disperse, but the Germans would be firmly established in their old positions. Any attempt to return to the surface would mean fighting through prepared defenses. "We need to get word back to our lines," Parker said, echoing Murray's thoughts. "Let them know there are survivors. Find out where the front has moved to." Murray nodded, already forming a plan. The old mines had been dug for efficiency. They would follow the coal seams, taking the straightest path between key points. If he was right about the layout, they might be able to work their way back to British positions through the underground network. But first, they needed to help their wounded and gather their strength. The storage cache was proof that these tunnels could serve as a temporary sanctuary. Now, they just had to figure out how to use them as a path to salvation. Looking at the men around him, soldiers turned miners by desperate circumstance, Murray felt a strange sense of coming full circle. He'd left the mines to fight in the trenches, only to find that salvation lay in returning to the darkness underground. His father would have appreciated the irony. A tattered unit flag hung limply in the stale underground air, its regimental colours barely visible in the lamplight. Lieutenant Parker had insisted they bring it down, not for ceremony, but for what it represented. Identity, purpose, a reminder that they were still soldiers, even here in the darkness. Murray watched as Parker organised the survivors into groups, each with specific tasks. The lieutenant's voice was still rough from the gas, but his authority remained undiminished. Williams, take 4 men and set up an observation post at the shaft entrance. Rotate every hour. No one stays up there too long. Cooper, you and Davies inventory our supplies. Harrison, get those with medical training to help the worst affected. The rest of you, rest while you can. The men moved with purpose, grateful for clear orders in their uncertain situation. Murray noted how Parker had paired the gas-stricken with the stronger survivors, ensuring no one was left helpless. "What about you, Murray?" Parker asked. "What do you need?" "2 men who can still walk straight, preferably ones who've worked underground before." Murray spread his crude map on a wooden crate. "We need to scout these tunnels properly, find all the possible routes out." A soldier stepped forward, Private Roberts, a Welsh coal miner before the war. "I'll go, sir. Used to work the night. A shift in Cardiff, feeling my way through the dark." Another man joined him, Corporal Bennett, who'd helped build the London Underground extensions. Not quite the same as coal mining, but he'd know how to move in confined spaces. Murray nodded his approval. "We'll start with the East Tunnel, work our way along the seam. If I'm right about the layout, it should run parallel to our front line for at least a mile." As they prepared for the scouting mission, Cooper approached with his supply inventory. "Found something interesting in one of the engineer's boxes," he said, holding up a roll of white tape. "It's reflective, catches lamplight like cat's eyes, could mark our route as we go." "Good thinking." Murray took the tape. "In the mines, we use chalk marks, but this is better. Won't wash away in the damp." They worked quickly, establishing their underground base of operations. The natural cavity that held the engineers' supplies became their command post, with smaller chambers serving as medical station and rest areas. Men who could still write began documenting their numbers, weapons, and supplies. Private Mills, the former gamekeeper, proved particularly valuable. His sharp eyes, once used for spotting poachers, now tracked the subtle signs of air movement that could lead them to other exits. "Like watching for disturbed leaves on a trail," he explained. "The air moves different near openings." Murray left him studying the tunnel airflows and joined Roberts and Bennett for their scouting mission. They moved carefully east, marking their route with Cooper's reflective tape. The tunnel showed signs of different mining eras. Sections of modern shoring mixed with older wooden supports. "Look here." Roberts pointed to a curved section of wall. "They hit water while digging this part. See how they reinforced it? Same technique we used in Wales." Murray examined the workmanship. "Good eye. Means we're near an aquifer. Might explain why these tunnels weren't on regular maps. Too much flooding risk for normal mining." They continued on, documenting everything that might prove useful. Side passages, air shafts, geological features. Murray was particularly interested in any signs of recent German activity. If they'd missed these tunnels while preparing their gas attack, it gave the survivors a crucial advantage. A distant rumble filtered down from above, artillery fire, but muffled by 40 feet of earth. The war continued up there, but down here they fought a different battle against darkness, bad air, and the weight of Earth above them. Returning to their base, they found Parker had established a proper command structure. The 32 survivors had been organized into 4 teams of 8, each with a mix of skills and physical conditions. Every man had a role, a purpose, even if it was just helping the wounded or monitoring air quality. "We're not just hiding," Parker explained when Murray reported back. "We're reorganizing. The Germans think they've wiped out this sector. Let them think that while we gather our strength." The lieutenant's words sparked something in Murray's memory. "Sir, in the mines, after a collapse, we'd sometimes work in secret to surprise the rescue teams. Let them think an area was lost while we dug our way out from another direction." Parker studied the map Murray had expanded with their scouting information. "You think we could do something similar here? Not just escape, but strike back?" "Maybe." Murray traced a line along the tunnel system. "These workings run behind what used to be German lines. If they've advanced like we think, they'll be directly above us now, vulnerable." The implications hung in the air. 32 men, presumed dead, with detailed knowledge of underground passages the enemy didn't know existed. It was the kind of advantage that could change the course of a battle. Cooper joined them, still cataloging supplies. Found more engineers' equipment, explosives, detonators, even some field telephones. They really were planning something down. "Here." Parker's expression hardened with decision. "Then we'll finish what they started. Murray, how long would it take to learn these tunnels well enough to use them effectively?" "A day, maybe 2. Depends on how many side passages we find, how stable they are." Murray thought about the skills among their survivors, miners, engineers, men who understood the underground world. "We've got the right men for it." The tattered unit flag stirred slightly in a draft from one of the air shafts. Like them, it was dirty, damaged, but still serving its purpose. They were no longer just survivors of a gas attack. They were becoming something else, something the Germans wouldn't expect. "A ghost battalion," Cooper said quietly, watching other men move through the lamplight. "That's what we are now, dead to the world above, but still fighting." Murray nodded, understanding the truth in those words. The gas had killed the men they used to be, but down here in the darkness, they were being reborn as something more dangerous. Soldiers who had faced death and returned, carrying with them the knowledge of how to strike from below. He touched his father's brass matchbox, now empty of matches but full of meaning. In the mines, light had meant life. Here, in these war-torn tunnels, darkness would become their ally, their weapon, their path to revenge against those who had tried to poison them out of existence. Murray crouched in the observation post near the shaft entrance, studying a handful of contaminated soil. Even hours after the attack, the earth retained traces of the gas, a chemical taint that burned the nostrils and stung the eyes. This was what modern warfare had become. Not just killing men, but poisoning the very ground they fought over. "The gas settles into low spots," he explained to Parker and Cooper, who watched him work. "Seeps into the soil, contaminates groundwater. In the mines, we'd abandon areas that showed this kind of chemical corruption. But we can't abandon the trenches," Parker said, his voice still raw from gas exposure. "We need to understand what we're dealing with." Cooper had brought up one of the Royal Engineers' boxes they'd found below. Inside were chemical testing kits, pH papers, and detailed notes on various industrial gases. The engineers hadn't just been preparing emergency shelters, they'd been studying chemical warfare. "Chlorine," Murray confirmed, comparing his observations with the engineers' documents. "Industrial strength, probably from the German dye works. They've weaponized their chemical industry." He remembered visiting a Yorkshire textile mill with his father, seeing the huge chlorine tanks used for bleaching. The Germans had simply taken a manufacturing process and turned it into a weapon of mass suffocation. "Look at this," Cooper said, holding up a notebook filled with calculations. The engineers were mapping wind patterns, studying ground contours. They knew this was coming. Murray nodded. Makes sense. In mining, you have to understand airflows, how gases move through confined spaces. The trenches are just like mine shafts in that way. Parker studied their crude periscope, observing the German positions above. They'll use it again. Now that they know it works, they'll make it part of their standard tactics. Yes, Murray agreed, but now we know too, and knowledge is protection. He pulled out his own notebook, where he'd been sketching diagrams. The gas follows predictable patterns. Like in the mines, it flows downhill, pools in low areas, disperses in open spaces. He'd spent hours correlating the engineer's notes with his mining experience, building a comprehensive understanding of their new enemy. The gas was deadly but not unstoppable. It had weaknesses, limitations they could exploit. "Show me," Parker said. Murray laid out his diagrams. The gas needs specific conditions to be effective: right wind direction, right ground contours, right and concentration. Change any of those factors and it becomes less lethal. He pointed to areas he'd marked on their map. These high points, gas disperses quickly here. These dugouts with multiple entrances, cross-ventilation helps clear the air. And most importantly, the gas is heavier than air. It sinks into low ground, but it can't climb. Cooper studied the markings intently. So we could use the terrain against them? Force the gas to go where we want? Exactly. Murray drew lines showing air currents. In the mines, we used ventilation systems to control gas flows. The same principles apply here. We can create safe zones, escape routes, even turn their weapon back against them. Parker's expression hardened with understanding. That's why the engineers were mapping these tunnels. They weren't just planning escape routes, they were preparing for underground warfare. The implications were staggering. The Germans had changed the nature of warfare above ground. But below, in these ancient mining tunnels, a different kind of fight was possible. "Sir," Cooper said carefully, "if we understand how the gas behaves, and we control these tunnels—" He let the thought hang unfinished. Murray picked it up. "We can predict where they'll use it next. The wind patterns, the terrain, it all points to their likely targets." He spread out their map, pointing to specific sectors. "They'll want the same conditions that made their first attack successful, which means we can be ready." Parker finished. "Set traps, prepare countermeasures, maybe even turn their own weapon against them." The three men fell silent, contemplating the moral implications of what they were discussing. Using the enemy's chemical weapons against them, it felt like crossing a line. But hadn't that line already been crossed when the Germans released their poison cloud? Murray thought of the men he'd seen die in the gas attack, choking on their own dissolved lung tissue. He remembered the young private, barely 19, whose face had turned blue as he clawed for air that no longer gave life. "There's something else," he said finally, "something I learned in the mines about gas pockets." He pointed to their underground map. "These tunnels form a natural ventilation system. With the right modifications, we could control the airflow." Cooper finished, catching on. "Create safe zones, direct the gas." Parker studied both men. "Can you do it? Set up a system to protect our lines and turn their weapon back on them?" Murray thought about the skills among their survivors. Miners, engineers, men who understood both the underground world and the new realities of chemical warfare. "Yes," he said, "but we'll need every man's expertise, and we'll need time." "Time you'll have," Parker assured him. "The Germans think they've won this sector. Let them believe it while we prepare our response." They returned to their underground base, where the other survivors waited for news. Murray looked at their faces, dirty, gas-burned, but determined. These men had survived the first chemical attack in military history. Now they would become experts in this new kind of warfare, fighting fire with fire from beneath the earth. In his pocket, Murray's soil sample seemed to burn with possibilities. The Germans had poisoned this ground, thinking to drive defenders from the trenches. Instead, they had driven them underground, where old mining tunnels and new military science would combine to create something unprecedented. A ghost battalion that could strike from below using the enemy's own weapons. Against them, the war had changed today. Tomorrow they would change it again. The weather station report fluttered in Murray's trembling hands, its penciled notations telling a story that seemed almost too perfect to believe. Cooper had found it in another Royal Engineers cache, along with meteorological instruments and wind charts for the entire sector. "Sir," Murray called to Parker, his voice urgent, "you need to see this." The lieutenant hurried over, followed by several other men who'd been planning their underground defenses. They gathered around the small table where Murray had spread out the weather documents. "The Germans made a mistake," Murray said, pointing to the charts. "A massive one. They based their gas attack on old weather patterns, regular easterly winds that usually blow across our lines. But look at these new readings." Parker leaned in, studying the numbers. "The wind's changing. Not just changing, it's shifting completely. There's a major weather system moving in from the west." Murray's finger traced the approaching front. "On the meteorological map. The engineers saw it coming. That's why they prepared these tunnels. They knew the Germans would try a gas attack, and they knew it would backfire." Cooper sucked in a breath. "Their own gas. It'll blow back on them." Worse than that. Murray overlaid the wind chart with their tactical map. "The German positions are in a low-lying area. When this front hits, it won't just push the gas back. It'll trap it in their trenches. They've dug themselves into a bowl." The men exchanged looks, the implications sinking in. The Germans had unleashed a weapon they couldn't control, and nature itself was about to turn it against them. Private Mills spoke up from the back. "Already starting, sir. When I was on observation duty, saw the weather vane shifting. Winds backing round to the southwest." Parker's expression was grim. "How long?" "Hours at most," Murray said. "But that's not all." He pulled out another document, detailed surveys of the ground elevation. "See these contours? The German lines are linked by communication trenches that run downhill. When the gas flows back, it'll flow through their entire position," Parker finished, "like water finding the lowest point." A heavy silence fell over the group. They had all seen what the gas did, had watched men die in agony as their lungs dissolved. Now the same fate awaited the German troops who had deployed the weapon. "We could warn them," Cooper said quietly. "Signal somehow, and reveal that we survived, that we know about these tunnels." Parker shook his head. "They made their choice when they released the gas. Now they'll face the consequences." Murray understood both perspectives. His mining experience had taught him that, underground, men looked out for each other regardless of their differences. A collapse or gas pocket didn't care what language you spoke. But this was war, and the Germans had crossed a line with their chemical attack. "There's more," he said, turning to another page. "The engineers weren't just tracking weather. They were studying gas dispersal patterns, how chemical agents behave in different atmospheric conditions." He pointed to a series of calculations. "When this wind hits, it won't just push the gas back, it'll concentrate it. The cold front will push it down, make it denser." "Christ," someone muttered. "They'll get a double dose of their own medicine." Parker paced the small command area, thinking hard. "This changes everything. We're not just survivors anymore. We're in a position to strike." He turned to Murray. "How can we use this?" Murray spread out their underground map. "The Germans will panic when the gas starts flowing back. They'll abandon their forward positions, fall back to higher ground. That's when these tunnels become vital." He traced potential routes. "We can move behind them, cut off their retreat, hit them from below while their own weapon hits them from above," Cooper said, catching on. Mills added his hunter's expertise. "Like driving game into a trap. The gas herds them, we wait at the choke points." The plan began taking shape. Murray showed how they could use the mining tunnels to outflank the German positions, emerging where the enemy least expected resistance. Their small force would seem like an army in the chaos of the gas withdrawal. "We'll need to time it perfectly," Parker said. "Too early and we expose ourselves. Too late, And we risk getting caught in the gas ourselves. Murray nodded. The engineers left us everything we need. Gas masks, weapons, even field telephones to coordinate the attack. He paused, looking at a final document. They knew this would happen. They prepared for it. We're just the ones who survived to carry out their plan. The wind meter they'd positioned near the observation post began to click faster, its arrow swinging steadily westward. Nature's judgment was approaching, as inexorable as the tide. How do we protect ourselves? Cooper asked. When we go up to attack? Murray had already thought this through. We use the engineers' supplies, but we also use our mining knowledge. Wet cloths treated with sodium bicarbonate. They left crates of the stuff. And we stay high, let the gas flow below us. Fight from above for once, instead of wallowing in the trenches. Parker gathered the men closer. Listen carefully. What we're about to do, it's not just revenge. It's not just survival. We're going to show the Germans that their own weapons can be turned against them, that there are some lines you don't cross without consequences. The men nodded, their faces set with grim determination. They had been victims once, choking in the yellow cloud of German gas. Now they would become something else, avengers rising from the earth itself, using the enemy's own weapon and the wind's cruel turn to exact nature's punishment. Murray felt the weight of his father's matchbox, now filled with sodium bicarbonate instead of matches. The Germans had thought to clear the trenches with their gas, never imagining that they would drive their enemies underground, where old mining tunnels and new military science would combine to create their doom. Above them, the wind continued to shift, gathering strength for what the men were already calling the Devil's Wind, a change in weather that would transform their underground survivors into agents of retribution. The Ghost Battalion prepared for war. The broken compass in Murray's hand spun wildly, its needle refusing to settle. It was an apt metaphor for their mission, navigation through chaos, seeking direction when all normal points of reference had vanished. Above them, the wind howled. Through the observation post's opening, carrying the first hints of returning gas. Time, Parker said quietly, checking his watch against Murray's. In the tunnels below, 30 men waited for the signal to begin their ascent. Each was armed with an engineer's gas mask, a rifle, and the desperate courage of those who had already survived death once. Murray made one final check of their equipment. The engineers had left them everything they needed, treated cloth masks, weapons, ammunition, even chalk for marking safe routes. Most precious were the wind detection strips, thin pieces of cloth that would show the direction of any gas flow. The wind's right, Cooper reported from his position near the shaft entrance. Strong westerly, just like the charts predicted. Temperature dropping too. It'll keep the gas low to the ground. They had positioned observers at key points throughout their tunnel network, each equipped with field telephones to report German movements. The enemy was already showing signs of confusion, their regular trench routine disrupted by the changing weather. Murray studied their final attack plan, drawn carefully on the engineer's survey map. They would emerge from 5 different points, using the tunnel network to surround the German position. The returning gas would drive the enemy into their carefully prepared kill zones. "Check your mask seals," he reminded the men nearby. "Remember your mining training. Test the air at different heights. Gas sinks, so keep your head up when you can." Private Roberts, the Welsh miner, demonstrated the technique they'd practiced, holding a small mirror at different levels to check for the yellowish tinge of chlorine gas. It was an old mining trick, adapted for this new kind of warfare. "Exit points are marked," Cooper said, indicating the reflective tape they'd used to guide their way. "Teams know their routes. We've got enough treated cloths and bicarb to last. Do ours." Parker gathered them for final instructions. "Remember, we're not looking for a stand-up fight. Let the gas do the work. We strike at their flanks, cut off their retreat routes. Heard some of you calling this the Devil's Wind. Let's make sure the devils get their due." Murray felt the weight of his father's matchbox, now containing a compressed cloth treated with sodium bicarbonate, an emergency mask if their main ones failed. Every man carried similar backup protection, learned from bitter experience. The field telephone buzzed. Mills's voice came through, tense but clear. First signs of gas blowback, reaching German lines. They're starting to realize something's wrong. Through their periscope, they could see increased activity in the enemy trenches. Shouts carried across no man's land, followed by the sharp blast of warning whistles. The Germans had spotted the approaching yellow cloud, their own weapon returning like a vengeful spirit. "Ready?" Parker asked quietly. Murray nodded, checking the wind one final time. Everything was in place. They had survived the Germans' gas attack by going underground. Now they would rise from the earth itself, using the enemy's own weapon against them. "Ready," he confirmed. "Ghost Battalion is ready to fight." The muddy boot prints they left in no man's land told a story of their own. Not a desperate charge across open ground, but a careful advance through a poisoned landscape. Murray led his group through the fog, using his mining lamp now hooded with blue cloth to signal their position to the other teams. The returning gas created an otherworldly scene. Yellow-green clouds rolled back toward the German lines, flowing like water into the lowest points of their trenches. The enemy's own defensive network was becoming their trap, channeling the deadly chlorine exactly as Murray had predicted. "Keep to the high ground," he whispered through his mask, voice muffled, but clear enough for the men closest to him. They moved like ghosts through the mist, their gas masks giving them an inhuman appearance in the strange half-light. Cooper checked their mirror strips every few yards, monitoring the gas flow. The wind remained steady from the west, pushing the chemical cloud exactly where they wanted it. Above them, the sky had turned an eerie bronze color as dawn light filtered through the poisoned air. The first German cries reached them, shouts of alarm turning to screams of realization as their own weapon returned to punish them. Through gaps in the gas cloud, Murray could see enemy soldiers scrambling from their forward positions, abandoning equipment in their panic to escape. "They're running straight into Mills's sector," Cooper observed quietly. The old gamekeeper and his team would be waiting at the predicted choke point, ready to cut off the German retreat. Murray checked his father's watch, 20 minutes since they'd emerged from the tunnels. The gas was working faster than expected, the cold front pushing it down and concentrating its effects just as the engineers' calculations had suggested. A sudden movement ahead made them freeze. Through the swirling yellow mist, a group of German soldiers appeared, coughing and stumbling. They wore no gas masks. Clearly they'd been caught unprepared by the wind's change. The Germans stared at Murray's masked figures with terror, perhaps thinking them some kind of demons risen from the poisoned earth. "Hands up!" Parker's voice cut through their confusion. The Germans, choking on their own weapon, surrendered without resistance. It was a scene that would repeat itself across the battlefield as the Ghost Battalion emerged from the fog to capture their gas-stricken enemies. The field telephone in Murray's pack buzzed. Robert's Welsh accent came through clearly. "Third exit. Point secured. Germans falling back all along the line. They're pulling out of the forward trenches completely. Everything was proceeding as they'd planned. The gas was herding the enemy exactly where they wanted them, creating chaos and panic that their small force could exploit. 30 men were doing the work of 300, appearing from the fog like avenging spirits. Murray led his group forward, following the high ground between shell holes. Each step had to be carefully chosen. The gas collected in craters and low spots, creating deadly pools that could kill even through their masks if the concentration grew too high. "Signal from Mills," Cooper reported, reading the lamp flashes. "From their left flank. Germans massing for organized withdrawal, at least company strength." Parker's response was immediate. "That's our target. Murray, can we cut them off?" Murray consulted their map, now marked with the observed gas flows. "There's a shallow ridge running parallel to their retreat route. If we move fast, we can get above them before they clear the gas zone." They quickened their pace, staying low but moving with purpose. The German soldiers they encountered were in no condition to resist. The gas had done its work, leaving them with the choice between surrender and suffocation. Through his mask's eyepieces, Murray studied the battlefield they'd helped create. The Germans' efficient trenches had become death traps, channeling the gas into their dugouts and bunkers. Their careful preparations, their scientific calculations, their precise planning, all undone by a change in the wind and a group of men who refused to die when the gas first came. The Ghost Battalion advanced through the poisoned wasteland they'd helped create, bringing judgment to those who had thought to win by breaking the ancient rules of war. Each muddy bootprint marked another step in their mission of retribution, leading them toward a final confrontation with the architects of their near destruction. The captured German orders crackled in Murray's hands, documents abandoned in a command post during the hasty retreat. Even with his limited German, he could read the essential details, dates, quantities, wind calculations. This hadn't been a single attack. They'd been planning a whole series of gas releases along the front. "Sir," he called to Parker, who was directing the securing of their first captured position, "you need to see this." The lieutenant joined him in the German command dugout, its previous occupants having fled the returning gas. Maps covered the walls, showing planned gas deployment zones stretching for miles along the Allied lines. The Germans had been methodically preparing to poison the entire front. "Look at these production figures," Murray pointed to a chart. "They've been stockpiling chlorine for months. These storage tanks here, they're full, ready for the next attack." Cooper, who'd been checking the dugout's communications equipment, looked up sharply. "Those tanks, they're right above us now, aren't they?" Murray consulted their position on the map. "Yes, main storage depot less than 200 yards east. Would be too heavy to move quickly." He paused, a plan forming. "If we could rupture those tanks, the gas would pour straight down into their own support trenches," Parker finished. "Cut off any chance of a counterattack." The steady westerly wind continued to blow, driving the original gas cloud deeper into the German positions. Through the dugout's periscope, they could see enemy troops still struggling to evacuate their forward trenches, many without masks, choking on their own weapon. Private Mills appeared at the dugout entrance, his mask pushed up on his forehead. "Air's clearer up here on the high ground, sir, but the gas is settling thick in their reserve trenches. Never seen anything like it." "Their own engineering is working against them," Murray explained, pointing to the German trenches' design. "They built their positions to channel gas toward our lines. Now those same channels are filling up like bowls." A field telephone buzzed, Roberts reporting from their left flank. "Large enemy force, assembling in grid square 23. Look to be preparing a counterattack. They've got masks this time." Parker studied the map, calculating angles and elevations. "They'll try to push through the gas, retake these forward positions. It's what we do." "Not if we reach those storage tanks first," Murray said quietly. The implications hung in the air. They had already turned the Germans' gas against them. Once, using their own stored weapons would be another escalation. But hadn't they crossed that line the moment they released the first cloud? "How many men?" Parker asked. 6, Murray answered. 3 to handle the tanks, 3 to provide cover. "We can use the mining tunnels to get close. There's a shaft that comes up near the depot." Cooper checked their remaining supplies. "We've got enough explosives from the engineer's cache. Small charges on the release valves should do it." Parker made his decision. "Take Cooper and Mills. I'll send Roberts and 2 of his men to meet you at the tunnel entrance. The rest of us will hold these positions. Make it look like we're digging in here." Murray nodded, already planning the route. In the mines, he'd learned that the most dangerous jobs often required the smallest teams. Too many men just meant too many ways things could go wrong. They gathered their equipment quickly, explosives, detonators, and most importantly, their gas masks and backup filters. The German storage depot would be heavily guarded, but the returning gas had created chaos in their lines. It was the perfect time to strike. "One more thing," Parker said as they prepared to leave. If you can't, reach the tanks, or if anything goes wrong, blow the tunnel itself. Better to trap their gas underground than let them use it again. Murray patted his father's matchbox, now carrying a final emergency filter. Understood, sir. Either way, those tanks won't be a threat much longer. They moved out, leaving the captured dugout to make their way back to the tunnel entrance. Around them, the battlefield had taken on an apocalyptic quality. Drifting gas clouds colored the dawn sky in sickly shades, while German flares cast an eerie light through the poisoned air. The Ghost Battalion was about to strike its most decisive blow, using the enemy's own weapons to make sure this new kind of warfare came with a price its inventors hadn't anticipated. In the distance, German warning sirens wailed, too late to save them from the retribution rising from beneath their feet. The broken gas mask lay at Murray's feet, its cracked eyepiece a reminder of how close death stalked them. Roberts had taken a rifle butt to the face during the first exchange of fire, the impact splintering his mask. Only Murray's quick action with a spare filter had saved him from the gas that now swirled through the storage depot. 3 minutes to set the charges, Cooper whispered, working quickly in the pre-dawn gloom. If these blueprints are right, rupturing these valves will empty the entire system. They had fought their way into the depot through a maintenance tunnel, emerging behind the German guards who never expected an attack from below. Mills and his men had dealt with the sentries silently, using skills learned in years of gamekeeper work. Now they held the depot's central chamber, surrounded by towering chlorine tanks that loomed like metal giants in the darkness. Movement outside, Mills reported from his position at the door. They know something's wrong. Won't be long before they come in force. Murray checked his father's watch. Dawn was approaching. They needed to finish this before full light, expose them. Through gaps in the depot's walls, he could see the continuing chaos in the German lines as the returned gas drove men from their positions. "Charges set," Cooper announced. "Detonators linked. We can trigger them from the tunnel entrance." A bullet pinged off one of the tanks, followed by shouts in German. Their time was up. "Fall back," Murray ordered. "Back to the tunnel. Move." They retreated in practiced order, covering each other's withdrawal. The Germans, finally realizing the threat to their chemical weapons, mounted a desperate attack to retake the depot. But they were hampered by their own gas, still flowing through the trenches below. Murray was last to reach the tunnel entrance, turning to fire a final burst that kept the Germans' heads down. As he did, he caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. Horse-drawn gas carts arriving with fresh tanks. The Germans weren't just planning to restart their gas attacks, they were preparing to escalate them. "Now, Cooper," he shouted as he dove into the tunnel. "Blow it!" Cooper triggered the detonators. The explosion was different from normal shells, not one sharp crack, but a series of pops as multiple valves ruptured. Then came a sound like 1,000 tea kettles, whistling at once as pressurized chlorine burst from the tanks. "Move!" Murray urged them deeper into the tunnel. "Before the gas reaches us!" They ran through the darkness, guided by their mining lamps and the reflective tape they'd placed earlier. Behind them, they could hear the gas pouring into the tunnel system, following them like a vengeful ghost. "Side passage," Roberts gasped through his damaged mask. "The one we marked for emergency use," Murray remembered, a vertical shaft that led to higher ground, their emergency escape route. "Up! Everyone up!" They scrambled up the shaft as the gas filled the main tunnel below. Murray's mask filters were nearly exhausted, each breath becoming harder than the last. Above, he could see early morning light filtering down. They were almost out. The first explosion caught them by surprise. The Germans, unable to reach them in the tunnels, were shelling the area, trying to collapse the shaft network. The walls shook, sending decades of coal dust cascading down. "Keep climbing," Murray shouted as another shell hit. "Almost there!" They emerged into the grey dawn one by one, rolling onto the relative safety of the high ground. Below them, the German positions were in chaos. The ruptured tanks had released far more gas than their original attack, creating a deadly fog that flowed through their entire trench system. "Look," Cooper pointed to the German rear areas. "They're pulling back, actually abandoning the whole sector." Murray watched through his cracked mask lenses as the Germans fled their positions. No counter-attack would come from these men. They had seen the true face of their own weapon turned against them. The Ghost Battalion had done more than survive. They had broken the enemy's will to continue this new kind of warfare, at least in this sector. The wind was changing again, beginning to disperse the gas clouds. Soon the sun would burn away the last of the poison, revealing the full extent of what they'd accomplished. They had emerged from the earth to strike back at those who tried to poison them, and in doing so, perhaps taught both sides a lesson about the true cost of chemical warfare. The victory medal felt cold and strangely heavy in Murray's bandaged hands. 2 days had passed since their raid on the gas depot, and the British lines had advanced nearly a mile into the abandoned German positions. The citation called it a strategic withdrawal. But Murray knew better. They had broken something in the enemy that day, not just their lines, but their confidence in their new weapon. "The entire sector," the colonel was saying, his voice still hoarse from gas exposure, "secured by 32 men." He shook his head in wonder. "The Ghost Battalion. They're calling you now. The men who rose from the dead to strike back." Murray looked at his surviving comrades, their faces still bearing the chemical burns and haunted expressions of their ordeal. They had started as victims and become avengers, but in the end, they were simply soldiers who had refused to die when death itself came seeking them in a yellow cloud. "Sir," he said quietly, "about the tunnels. Already being mapped by the Royal Engineers," the colonel assured him. "Your mining knowledge may have changed the course of this war, Murray. They'll never be able to use gas against us the same way again." The blood-stained letter trembled in Cooper's hands as he read it to Murray in the field hospital. It had been found in the pocket of one of their fallen comrades, never sent. Like so many others, it spoke of hope, of plans for after the war, of promises that would now go unkept. "We should write to their families," Cooper said, his voice still raw from the gas. "Tell them how their sons died fighting back, not just choking in a trench." Murray nodded, thinking of his own letter home, trying to find words to explain what they'd lived through. How did one describe the taste of poison in the air, or the sound of men drowning in their own lungs? In the end, he wrote simply, "Father, your mining lessons saved more lives than I can count. The darkness below ground became our salvation, just as you always said it would." They had survived, but the yellow dawn had marked them forever, turning them into men who understood both the depths of human cruelty and the heights of human resilience. The hospital records told the story in clinical terms: chemical burns to respiratory tissue, permanent lung damage, recurring nightmares. But they couldn't capture the deeper wounds, how the survivors of the Ghost Battalion flinched at the smell of chlorine, or how they woke, gasping in the night, thinking they were back in those gas-filled trenches. Yet they had found strength in their shared experience. Murray and Cooper still met monthly, sharing memories only they could understand. They had learned to live with their scars, both visible and hidden, turning their survival into a testament to human endurance. In the mines, Murray had once told his father, "You learn to see in the dark." Now they had learned to live with the shadows of their past. The memorial plaque gleamed in the autumn sunlight of 1935. Murray stood before it, his father's old matchbox in his weathered hands. Each year, he returned to teach young mining engineers about gas safety, sharing lessons learned in blood and valor. The Ghost Battalion's story lived on, a warning about the terrible price of chemical warfare and a testament to the human spirit's capacity to rise from the darkest depths. The preserved cigarette case sat between them, a relic of that fateful dawn. Cooper's son listened intently as Murray explained how a shared smoke had forged a bond that saved both their lives. "Your father taught me," Murray told the young man, "that humanity survives in the smallest gestures, even in our darkest hours." He opened the case, revealing the last cigarette, still unsmoked, a testament to the moment when compassion defeated death itself.